Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Shepherd Boy. Once upon a time, in a quiet valley where sheep grazed on green hills, there lived a humble shepherd boy. Though his clothes were poor and his shoes worn thin, he was known far and wide for the quickness of his mind and the wisdom of his words. Old men marveled at his replies, maidens listened with wonder, and even the learned scholars who passed through the countryside confessed that the boy's answers often struck deeper than their own books. At last, the rumor of his cleverness reached the king himself. Yet kings are not always ready to believe tales told by travelers, and this one thought, "What can a ragged shepherd know that the wise men of my court do not?" Still, curiosity pricked him. He sent messengers to fetch the boy to the royal palace. When the shepherd stood before the king, the courtiers mocked his patched coat and sunburnt face. But the king silenced them and said, "If you can answer 3 questions that I shall put to you, I will take you as my own child. You will dwell with me in my palace, robed in silk and fed at my table. But if you cannot, you will return to your sheep, and men will no longer speak of your wisdom." The boy bowed and said, "Ask, O king. A true answer fears no test." Then the king spoke. "The first question is this: how many drops of water lie in the ocean?" The courtiers smiled, certain the boy would falter. But the shepherd answered calmly, "Mighty king, if you command that every river and stream be dammed, so that not a single drop of water flows into the sea until I have finished my counting, then I shall tell you how many drops there are. Until then, who can reckon what is ever being added?" The king raised his eyebrows, for the answer was sharp, and none could deny it. He said, "The second question is harder still. Tell me how many stars are scattered in the heavens above." "Gee," the shepherd asked for a sheet of white parchment. When it was brought, he pricked it with his pen so many times, making countless tiny dots, that the eyes of those who looked upon it grew weary and dazzled. The paper seemed covered with dust too fine to number. "Behold," said the boy, "as many stars are in the sky as there are points upon this page. Count them, and you shall know their number." But no one in the court could count them. Their vision blurred, and their heads swam with the attempt. Murmurs of astonishment filled the hall. The king leaned forward and said, "You have escaped twice, shepherd, but here is the third and last question. Tell me, how many seconds are there in eternity?" Then the boy's face grew solemn, and he spoke slowly, as if telling a tale. "In Lower Pomerania there stands the Diamond Mountain. It is 2.5 miles in height, 2.5 miles in breadth, and 2.5 miles in depth. Once every 100 years, a little bird flies to that mountain to sharpen its beak upon the diamond. When the whole mountain has at last been worn away to nothing by the touch of that small bird, then the very first second of eternity will have passed." The hall fell silent. Not a voice dared to laugh, for the weight of the answer pressed upon their hearts like the endless stretch of time itself. The king rose from his throne, descended the steps, and laid his hand upon the shepherd boy's shoulder. "You have answered like a wise man," he said. "Henceforth you shall dwell with me, not as a servant, but as my own child. For wisdom is greater than gold, and truth more enduring than thrones." And so the shepherd boy, who once tended sheep among the lonely hills, came to live in the royal palace, honored and beloved, and his fame as a child of wisdom was carried to every land. The Wilful Child. Once upon a time, in a quiet village where the cottages leaned close to one another and the church bells tolled with measured sorrow, there lived a child who was willful beyond measure. From the earliest days of her speaking, she turned her head away from her mother's counsel. When she was told to obey, she rebelled. When she was urged toward kindness, she hardened her heart. No pleading, no warning, no tender embrace could bend her spirit, for the stubbornness of disobedience grew in her as thorns grow upon a wild hedge. And so it came to pass that the Lord himself took no delight in her ways. For the world he had fashioned was one of order, and the child had chosen defiance. As the years passed not long, her health began to wither. First it was a pallor upon her cheeks, then came fevers that no cool cloth could soothe, pains that no gentle hand could ease. Her mother sought out doctors both near and far, men who had herbs and powders, men who whispered prayers, and men who spoke with voices stern and learned. Yet not one of them could do the girl any good. The sickness clung to her as ivy clings to stone. At last she lay upon her bed, pale as linen, the shadow of death already stretching over her. Her mother wept, but still the child turned her eyes away, stubborn even at the threshold of eternity. Soon she breathed her last, and her soul departed, leaving her body cold and still. The villagers came together, as is the way of folk, to carry her to the churchyard. They lowered her into the narrow grave, and the earth, dark and heavy, was heaped upon her until nothing could be seen but the mound. Prayers were said, candles were burned, and the mourners went their way. Yet scarcely had the ground grown quiet when a strange and dreadful thing occurred. From beneath the soil, a pale arm forced its way upward, stretched stiff and unyielding into the air. The fingers groped toward heaven, restless and unwilling to rest. The villagers, seeing this horror, cried out and fled, for they knew no peace lies in the hand of a child who had never learned obedience. When the men returned with trembling hearts, they pushed the arm back into the grave and spread new earth upon it. But when they turned away, the arm rose once more, white against the dark soil. Again and again they pressed it down, shoveling more earth upon it, yet always it returned, as though the stubborn spirit of the girl refused even the grave's command. At last, the mother herself was summoned. With heavy heart, she came to the burial place. Her face was hollow from grief, yet there was a sternness in her eyes. She took in her hand a rod, for she had borne the child in life and must now deal with her in death. Standing over the grave, she struck the arm sharply, as one might strike away a disobedient gesture. At that moment, the hand withdrew, sinking down into the earth as though compelled by an unseen force. The soil settled still, and no limb rose again. At last there was silence and rest in the grave, and the willful child lay bound beneath the ground, subdued not by doctors nor prayers, but by the stern hand of her mother and the justice of heaven. And so the tale is told, to warn all who would turn away from love and command alike. For the willful heart finds no peace, not in life nor in death, until it is humbled. The Three Apprentices. There were once 3 young apprentices who had journeyed far from their homes to learn their crafts. They had sworn a solemn promise that wherever they wandered, they would remain together, share their bread, and seek work in the same towns. For a time, this vow kept them fed and clothed. Yet fortune, which often changes her face, turned against them. Their masters had no tasks left for them, and the lads found themselves ragged and hungry, with empty purses and weary feet. One evening, as they sat by the roadside in deep despair, one of them said, "Brothers, what shall we do? We cannot linger here where no one needs us. Let us go onward to another town. If we fail again to find work, let us make a pact with the innkeeper there. Each shall write and tell him where he stays, so that we may keep tidings of one another, even if we part ways." His companions nodded, for the counsel seemed wise. So they set forth. Before long, they encountered a richly dressed gentleman on the road, whose cloak shimmered like silk and whose boots shone like polished glass. He asked who they were. "We are apprentices," they answered, "wandering in search of work. Until now, we have always stayed together, but should fortune forsake us, we must separate." "There is no need for that," said the stranger with a smile that was too sharp to be kind. "If you will do only as I command, you shall never lack gold nor employment. Nay, you shall rise above all others, become great lords, and ride in splendid carriages with horses at your call." The first apprentice, boldest of the 3, said, "If our souls and salvation be not endangered, we will gladly hear you." "They shall not," replied the man smoothly. "I have no claim upon you." But the second, more cautious, cast his eyes downward, and there, beneath the fine garments, he spied something dreadful. One foot was shaped like a man's, the other like a horse's hoof. At once he trembled, for he knew who stood before them. The devil, seeing their fear, laughed low. "Be easy. I do not seek your souls. Another soul I already half possess, and I need only to fill its measure. As for you, I offer merely wealth and comfort." Thus reassured, though not without unease, they consented. The devil then laid down his bargain. "The first of you must answer every question with the words, 'All 3 of us.' The second shall say, 'For money.' And the third shall declare, 'And quite right too.' These alone you may speak, and nothing else. If you break this command, your riches shall vanish like smoke. But if you keep it faithfully, your purses shall ever brim with gold." At once he gave them so much money that they could scarcely carry it, and told them which inn to seek when they reached the next town. When they arrived, the innkeeper came bustling out and asked, "Do you gentlemen desire food?" "All 3 of us," replied the first. "Yes, yes," said the host. "That is understood." "For money," added the second. "Of course," said the host, eyeing their fine clothes. "And quite right, too," said the third. "Indeed, quite right," chuckled the innkeeper, and soon he brought them meat and wine of the best kind. After the feast, the reckoning was brought. The host handed the bill to the first apprentice. He said, "All 3 of us." The second said, "For money." The third chimed, "And quite right, too." "Exactly so," laughed the host. "All 3 pay, and without money I can give nothing." But to his amazement, they paid more than he asked. The other lodgers whispered, "These fellows are mad." "Yes," agreed the host, shaking his head. "They are not overwise." For many days the apprentices dwelt in the inn, speaking nothing save those 3 phrases. Yet, though they spoke little, they saw and understood all that happened around them. One evening, a wealthy merchant arrived with a heavy chest of gold. He said to the innkeeper, "Take care of my money, I beg you. There are 3 strange fellows here, and I fear they might rob me." The innkeeper promised to guard it. But when he carried the chest upstairs, he felt the weight of the treasure, and greed awoke in him. He gave the merchant a fine room above, while the apprentices lodged below. At midnight, when all seemed quiet, the innkeeper and his wife crept into the merchant's chamber with an axe. There they struck him dead and returned to bed, as though nothing had happened. At dawn, the house was filled with uproar. The merchant lay slain in a pool of blood. All the guests came running. The innkeeper cried, "The 3 mad apprentices have done this wicked deed." The lodgers, who had always thought them strange, agreed. "It can be no one else." So the apprentices were summoned. The host demanded, "Did you kill the merchant?" "All 3 of us," said the first. "For money," said the second. "And quite right, too," said the third. "There," shouted the host, "you hear them confess with their own mouths." They were seized, bound, and thrown into prison to await judgment. That night, as they trembled in their chains, the devil appeared to them. "Have courage," he said. "Bear it 1 day more. Not a hair on your heads shall be harmed if you remain faithful." Next morning, they were brought before the judge. "Are you the murderers?" he asked sternly. "All 3 of us." "Why did you slay the merchant?" "For money." "You wretches," thundered the judge. "Have you no shame for such sin?" "And quite right, too," answered the third. "They confess, and they show no repentance," declared the judge. "Lead them out to die." So they were led into the marketplace, where the headsman waited with his naked sword. The innkeeper himself walked among the crowd, eager to see them perish. But just as the apprentices were about to mount the scaffold, a great coach thundered into the square, drawn by 4 fiery chestnut horses. Sparks leapt from the stones beneath their hooves. From the window waved a white handkerchief. "Pardon! Pardon!" cried voices from within. The headsman stayed his hand, saying, "A pardon has come." Out stepped the nobleman, yet it was none other than the devil himself, clad like a prince. He said, "These 3 are innocent. Speak now, and reveal what you have witnessed." Then the eldest apprentice raised his hand and pointed. "We did not kill the merchant. The murderer stands there in the circle. It is the innkeeper. If you seek proof, descend into his cellar. There hang many more whom he has slain." The judge sent men to search. They returned pale and trembling, for they had found the bodies indeed, hidden away in the dark. At once the innkeeper was seized, and justice was done upon him. His head fell by the sword. Then the devil said to the 3, "Now I have taken the soul I sought. You are free, and gold shall never fail you all your days." So the apprentices lived out their years in wealth and safety, and their strange bargain was remembered wherever the tale was told. Wise folks. Once, in a small thatched cottage on the edge of a broad meadow, lived a peasant and his wife. The man was plain and strong, with a back bent from years of labor, and in his hand he carried a stout hazel stick that had served him in many quarrels with beasts and men alike. One morning he stood by the door, tapping that stick upon the floor, and spoke sternly to his wife. "Trina, I must go across the country, and shall not return for 3 full days. While I am gone, keep your eyes open and your tongue sharper still. If the cattle dealer comes, and he may, and if he offers to buy our 3 cows, then you may strike a bargain. But remember this, not a single hoof shall leave the yard for less than $200. Do you hear me? 200, not 1 coin less." The woman folded her hands in her apron and said mildly, "Go in peace, husband. Heaven help me, I shall manage it well enough." But the peasant shook his head and muttered darkly, "You manage? Ha! When you were but a small child, you tumbled on your head, and the mischief of it has never left you. Mark my words, Trina. If you do aught foolish, I shall thrash you till your back is black and blue, and it will not be paint that colors you, but this stick in my hand, and the marks will last a year, you may depend on it." With that grim warning, he strode away down the road. The very next morning the cattle dealer appeared, jingling his spurs and peering about with clever eyes. He saw the cows, he heard the price, and he nodded. $200? A fair bargain, madam. Indeed, they are worth it, and I shall not haggle. I will take them this very moment. He loosed their chains and drove them out. But just as he reached the gate, the peasant's wife seized him by the sleeve. "Nay, master dealer, the money first. Give me the $200 now, or the cows stay where they are." "True enough," said he, smiting his forehead. "But dear me, I have forgotten to buckle on my money belt this morning. Never fear, though, you shall have security. I will take but 2 cows, and leave 1 with you. That way you hold a pledge, and I shall return with the money soon enough." The woman nodded eagerly. "That is wisely spoken. Go then, and Hans will praise me for my cleverness. I have even kept the smallest cow, the one that eats least." And so she watched him drive away the best of the herd. On the 3rd day the peasant came home. "Well then," he cried as soon as he entered, "are the cows sold?" "Yes, indeed, dear Hans," said Trina with a smile. $200, just as you commanded. The man did not so much as raise an objection. "And where is the money?" "Oh, the money? He had forgotten his belt, poor soul, but he will soon return, for he left good security behind." "What security?" "1 cow," said she proudly, "and I kept the smallest. Was that not cunning?" At this, Hans's face turned red as fire. He raised his stick high, meaning to keep his promise and beat her soundly. Yet at the last moment, he let it fall, groaning aloud. "Woman, you are the greatest goose that ever waddled on God's earth. But listen well, I will not strike you this day. Instead, I shall walk the highways for 3 days. If in that time I find a soul more foolish than you, then you go free. If not, then prepare your back for the reward you have earned." So Hans went forth, seated himself upon a great stone by the roadside, and waited. Before long, he spied a cart rolling toward him, drawn by oxen, and a woman stood upright in the cart, swaying back and forth, though there was straw beside her to sit upon. "Here comes folly itself," thought Hans, and he leapt up, running before the cart like a madman. "What do you seek, good fellow?" called the woman. "I know you not. Whence come you?" "I have fallen straight from heaven," answered Hans solemnly. "And alas, I know not the way back. Could you perhaps drive me up again?" "No, indeed," said she, shaking her head. "But if you come from heaven, tell me of my husband. He has been there 3 years now. Surely you have seen him." Hans stroked his beard. "Aye, I saw him. He tends sheep, poor man, and the beasts give him endless trouble, for they scatter on the mountains and stray into the wilderness. He must run after them until his clothes are torn and ragged. Soon they will fall from his back altogether. And there are no tailors in heaven, for St. Peter will not admit any, as the story goes. The woman clasped her hands. Alas, who would have thought it? Wait but a little. I will fetch his Sunday coat, which still hangs in the cupboard, so he may be decent again. You will take it to him, will you not? Hans shook his head gravely. Clothes may not pass the heavenly gate, good wife, but if you wish to help him, give me money. That may be hidden in my pocket. Better still, she cried. I sold wheat only yesterday, and have a purse full of coin. Sit you here, I shall fetch it straightway. And mark you, I stand in the cart and not upon the straw, because it eases the oxen's load. Away she hurried, and soon returned with a heavy purse, which she pressed into Hans's hand, blessing him 1,000 times for his kindness. At home again, she told her son with joy how she had sent help to her poor husband in heaven. The youth was astonished. "Mother," said he, "such a chance comes not every day. I must see this man myself, for I would know what heaven is like." He saddled his horse and galloped off. Hans, who sat under a willow tree counting the coins, saw him come. "Good sir," cried the lad, "have you seen the man fallen from heaven?" "Yes," answered Hans. "He has already set out to climb back. He went up that hill yonder. If you ride quickly, you may catch him." "Alas," said the youth, weary from work, "I am too tired, but you know him well. Be so good as to take my horse and call him back." Hans chuckled to himself. "Another witless soul. Why should I not oblige?" He mounted the horse, spurred it into a trot, and vanished. The youth sat waiting till the shadows grew long, but Hans never returned. At last he said, "No doubt the heavenly man was in haste and took the horse to my father for his comfort." So he went home on foot and told his mother the tale. She nodded proudly. "Well done, my son. Thy father shall ride, while thou canst walk on younger legs." When Hans returned at last to his cottage, he put the horse in the stable beside the single cow. Then he entered, laid aside his stick, and said with a laugh, "Trina, fortune has smiled on you. I have found not one, but two, who are greater fools than you. This time you are spared a beating, though I may keep it in store for another day. And look here, we have gained a fat horse and a purse full of money in exchange for 2 lean cows. If folly always paid so richly, I should honor it as a trade worth keeping." And so he sat in his grandfather's chair, lit his pipe, and smoked in peace, while his wife looked on, still half proud of her own cleverness. But whether you prefer Hans's cunning or the simplicity of the foolish folk, well, that must be left to your own heart to decide. The Two Travelers. Hill and vale do not come together, but the children of men do, good and bad. In this way, a shoemaker and a tailor once met with each other in their travels. The tailor was a handsome little fellow who was always merry and full of enjoyment. He saw the shoemaker coming towards him from the other side, and as he observed by his bag what kind of a trade he plied, he sang a little mocking song to him. "Sew me the seam, draw me the thread, spread it over with pitch, knock the nail on the head." The shoemaker, however, could not endure a joke. He pulled a face as if he had drunk vinegar, and made a gesture as if he were about to seize the tailor by the throat. But the little fellow began to laugh, reached him his bottle, and said, "No harm was meant. Take a drink and swallow your anger down." The shoemaker took a very hearty drink, and the storm on his face began to clear away. He gave the bottle back to the tailor and said, "I spoke civilly to you. One speaks well after much drinking, but not after much thirst. Shall we travel together?" "All right," answered the tailor, "if only it suits you to go into a big town where there is no lack of work." "That is just where I want to go," answered the shoemaker. "In a small nest there is nothing to earn, and in the country people like to go barefoot." They traveled therefore onwards together, and always set one foot before the other like a weasel in the snow. Both of them had time enough, but little to bite and to break. When they reached a town, they went about and paid their respects to the tradesmen, and because the tailor looked so lively and merry and had such pretty red cheeks, everyone gave him work willingly, and when luck was good, the master's daughters gave him a kiss beneath the porch as well. When he again fell in with the shoemaker, the tailor had always the most in his bundle. The ill-tempered shoemaker made a wry face and thought, "The greater the rascal, the more the luck." But the tailor began to laugh and to sing, and shared all he got with his comrade. If a couple of pence jingled in his pockets, he ordered good cheer and thumped the table in his joy till the glasses danced, and it was lightly come, lightly go with him. When they had traveled for some time, they came to a great forest through which passed the road to the capital. 2 footpaths, however, led through it, one of which was a 7 days' journey, and the other only 2. But neither of the travelers knew which way was the short one. They seated themselves beneath an oak tree and took counsel together how they should forecast, and for how many days they should provide themselves with bread. The shoemaker said, "One must look before one leaps. I will take with me bread for a week." "What?" said the tailor. "Drag bread for 7 days on one's back, like a beast of burden, and not be able to look about. I shall trust in God, and not trouble myself about anything. The money I have in my pocket is as good in summer as in winter, but in hot weather bread gets dry and moldy into the bargain. Even my coat does not go as far as it might. Besides, why should we not find the right way? Bread for 2 days, and that's enough." Each, therefore, bought his own bread, and then they tried their luck in the forest. It was as quiet there as in a church. No wind stirred, no brook murmured, no bird sang, and through the thickly leaved branches no sunbeam forced its way. The shoemaker spoke never a word. The heavy bread weighed down his back until the perspiration streamed down his cross and gloomy face. The tailor, however, was quite merry. He jumped about, whistled on a leaf, or sang a song, and thought to himself, "God in heaven must be pleased to see me so happy." This lasted 2 days, but on the 3rd, the forest would not come to an end, and the tailor had eaten up all his bread, so after all his heart sank down a yard deeper. In the meantime, he did not lose courage, but relied on God and on his luck. On the 3rd day, he lay down in the evening hungry under a tree, and rose again next morning, hungry still. So also passed the 4th day, and when the shoemaker seated himself on a fallen tree and devoured his dinner, the tailor was only a looker-on. If he begged for a little piece of bread, the other laughed mockingly and said, "Thou hast always been so merry. Now thou canst try for once what it is to be sad. The birds which sing too early in the morning are struck by the hawk in the evening." In short, he was pitiless. But on the 5th morning, the poor tailor could no longer stand up, and was hardly able to utter one word for weakness. His cheeks were white, and his eyes red. Then the shoemaker said to him, "I will give thee a bit of bread today, but in return for it, I will put out thy right eye." The unhappy tailor, who still wished to save his life, could not do it in any other way. He wept once more with both eyes, and then held them out, and the shoemaker, who had a heart of stone, put out his right eye with a sharp knife. The tailor called to remembrance what his mother had formerly said to him when he had been eating secretly in the pantry. "Eat what one can, and suffer what one must." When he had consumed his dearly bought bread, he got on his legs again, forgot his misery, and comforted himself with the thought that he could always see enough with one eye. But on the 6th day, hunger made itself felt again, and gnawed him almost to the heart. In the evening, he fell down by a tree, and on the 7th morning, he could not raise himself up for faintness, and death was close at hand. Then said the shoemaker, "I will show mercy and give thee bread once more, but thou shalt not have it for nothing. I shall put out thy other eye for it." And now the tailor felt how thoughtless his life had been, prayed to God for forgiveness, and said, "Do what thou wilt, I will bear what I must. But remember that our Lord God does not always look on passively, and that an hour will come when the evil deed which thou hast done to me, and which I have not deserved of thee, will be requited. When times were good with me, I shared what I had with thee. My trade is of that kind that each stitch must always be exactly like the other. If I no longer have my eyes and can sew no more, I must go a-begging. At any rate, do not leave me here alone when I am blind, or I shall die of hunger." The shoemaker, however, who had driven God out of his heart, took the knife and put out his left eye. Then he gave him a bit of bread to eat, held out a stick to him, and drew him on behind him. When the sun went down, they got out of the forest, and before them in the open country stood the gallows. Thither the shoemaker guided the blind tailor, and then left him alone and went his way. Weariness, pain, and hunger made the wretched man fall asleep, and he slept the whole night. When day dawned, he awoke, but knew not where he lay. 2 poor sinners were hanging on the gallows, and a crow sat on the head of each of them. Then one of the men who had been hanged began to speak, and said, "Brother, art thou awake?" "Yes, I am awake," answered the second. "Then I will tell thee something," said the first. "The dew which this night has fallen down over us from the gallows gives everyone who washes himself with it his eyes again. If blind people did but know this, how many would regain their sight who do not believe that to be possible?" When the tailor heard that, he took his pocket handkerchief, pressed it on the grass, and when it was moist with dew, washed the sockets of his eyes with it. Immediately was fulfilled what the man on the gallows had said, and a couple of healthy new eyes filled the sockets. It was not long before the tailor saw the sun rise behind the mountains. In the plain before him lay the great royal city with its magnificent gates and 100 towers, and the golden balls and crosses which were on the spires began to shine. He could distinguish every leaf on the trees, saw the birds which flew past, and the midges which danced in the air. He took a needle out of his pocket, and as he could thread it as well as ever he had done, his heart danced with delight. He threw himself on his knees, thanked God for the mercy he had shown him, and said his morning prayer. He did not forget also to pray for the poor sinners who were hanging there, swinging against each other in the wind like the pendulums of clocks. Then he took his bundle on his back and soon forgot the pain of heart he had endured, and went on his way singing and whistling. The first thing he met was a brown foal running about the fields at large. He caught it by the mane and wanted to spring on it and ride into the town. The foal, however, begged to be set free. "I am still too young," it said. "Even a light tailor such as thou art would break my back in two. Let me go till I have grown strong. A time may perhaps come when I may reward thee for it." "Run off," said the tailor. "I see thou art still a giddy thing." He gave it a touch with a switch over its back, whereupon it kicked up its hind legs for joy, leapt over hedges and ditches, and galloped away into the open country. But the little tailor had eaten nothing since the day before. "The sun, to be sure, fills my eyes," said he, "but the bread does not fill my mouth. The first thing that comes across me and is even half edible will have to suffer for it." In the meantime, a stork stepped solemnly over the meadow towards him. "Halt, halt!" cried the tailor, and seized him by the leg. "I don't know if thou art good to eat or not, but my hunger leaves me no great choice. I must cut thy head off and roast thee." "Don't do that," replied the stork. "I am a sacred bird which brings mankind great profit, and no one does me an injury. Leave me my life, and I may do thee good in some other way." "Well, be off, cousin Longlegs," said the tailor. The stork rose up, let its long legs hang down, and flew gently away. "What's to be the end of this?" said the tailor to himself at last. "My hunger grows greater and greater, and my stomach more and more empty. Whatsoever comes in my way now is lost." At this moment he saw a couple of young ducks, which were on a pond, come swimming towards him. "You come just at the right moment," said he, and laid hold of one of them and was about to wring its neck. On this, an old duck, which was hidden among the reeds, began to scream loudly, and swam to him with open beak, and begged him urgently to spare her dear children. "Canst thou not imagine," said she, "how thy mother would mourn if anyone wanted to carry thee off, and give thee thy finishing stroke?" "Only be quiet," said the good-tempered tailor. "Thou shalt keep thy children," and put the prisoner back into the water. When he turned round, he was standing in front of an old tree, which was partly hollow, and saw some wild bees flying in and out of it. "There I shall at once find the reward of my good deed," said the tailor. "The honey will refresh me." But the queen bee came out, threatened him, and said, "If thou touchest my people and destroyest my nest, our stings shall pierce thy skin like 10,000 red-hot needles. But if thou wilt leave us in peace and go thy way, we will do thee a service for it another time." The little tailor saw that here also nothing was to be done. 3 dishes empty, and nothing on the 4th is a bad dinner. He dragged himself, therefore, with his starved-out stomach into the town, and as it was just striking 12, all was ready cooked for him in the inn, and he was able to sit down at once to dinner. When he was satisfied, he said, "Now I will get to work." He went round the town, sought a master, and soon found a good situation. As, however, he had thoroughly learnt his trade, it was not long before he became famous, and everyone wanted to have his new coat made by the little tailor, whose importance increased daily. "I can go no further in skill," said he, "and yet things improve every day." At last the king appointed him court tailor. But how things do happen in the world! On the very same day, his former comrade, the shoemaker, also became court shoemaker. When the latter caught sight of the tailor and saw that he had once more 2 healthy eyes, his conscience troubled him. "Before he takes revenge on me," thought he to himself, "I must dig a pit for him." He, however, who digs a pit for another, falls into it himself. In the evening, when work was over and it had grown dusk, he stole to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor is an arrogant fellow and has boasted that he will get the gold crown back again, which was lost in ancient times." "That would please me very much," said the king, and he caused the tailor to be brought before him next morning, and ordered him to get the crown back again, or to leave the town forever. "Oh ho," thought the tailor, "a rogue gives more than he has got. If the surly king wants me to do what can be done by no one, I will not wait till morning, but will go out of the town at once, today." He packed up his bundle, therefore, but when he was without the gate, he could not help being sorry to give up his good fortune and turn his back on the town in which all had gone so well with him. He came to the pond, where he had made the acquaintance of the ducks. At that very moment, the old one whose young ones he had spared was sitting there by the shore, pluming herself with her beak. She knew him again instantly, and asked why he was hanging his head. "So? Thou wilt not be surprised when thou hearest what has befallen me," replied the tailor, and told her his fate. "If that be all," said the duck, "we can help thee. The crown fell into the water and lies down below at the bottom. We will soon bring it up again for thee. In the meantime, just spread out thy handkerchief on the bank." She dived down with her 12 young ones, and in 5 minutes she was up again, and sat with the crown resting on her wings. And the 12 young ones were swimming round about, and had put their beaks under it, and were helping to carry it. They swam to the shore, and put the crown on the handkerchief. No one can imagine how magnificent the crown was. When the sun shone on it, it gleamed like 100,000 carbuncles. The tailor tied his handkerchief together by the 4 corners and carried it to the king, who was full of joy, and put a gold chain round the tailor's neck. When the shoemaker saw that one stroke had failed, he contrived a second and went to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor has become insolent again. He boasts that he will copy in wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertains to it, loose or fast, inside and out." The king sent for the tailor and ordered him to copy in wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertained to it, movable or immovable, within and without. And if he did not succeed in doing this, or if so much as one nail on the wall were wanting, he should be imprisoned for his whole life underground. The tailor thought, "It gets worse and worse. No one can endure that," and threw his bundle on his back and went forth. When he came to the hollow tree, he sat down and hung his head. The bees came flying out, and the queen bee asked him if he had a stiff neck, since he held his head so awry. "Alas, no," answered the tailor. "Something quite different weighs me down." And he told her what the king had demanded of him. The bees began to buzz and hum amongst themselves, and the queen bee said, "Just go home again, but come back tomorrow at this time, and bring a large sheet with you, and then all will be well." So he turned back again, but the bees flew to the royal palace and straight into it through the open windows, crept round about into every corner, and inspected everything most carefully. Then they hurried back and modeled the palace in wax with such rapidity that anyone looking on would have thought it was growing before his eyes. By the evening all was ready, and when the tailor came next morning, the whole of the splendid building was there, and not one nail in the wall or tile of the roof was wanting, and it was delicate withal, and white as snow, and smelt sweet as honey. The tailor wrapped it carefully in his cloth and took it to the king, who could not admire it enough, placed it in his largest hall, and in return for it presented the tailor with a large stone house. The shoemaker, however, did not give up, but went for the third time to the king and said, "Lord King, it has come to the tailor's ears that no water will spring up in the courtyard of the castle, and he has boasted that it shall rise up in the midst of the courtyard to a man's height and be clear as crystal." Then the king ordered the tailor to be brought before him and said, "If a stream of water does not rise in my courtyard by tomorrow, as thou hast promised, the executioner shall in that very place make thee shorter by the head." The poor tailor did not take long to think about it, but hurried out to the gate, and because this time it was a matter of life and death to him, tears rolled down his face. Whilst he was thus going forth full of sorrow, the foal to which he had formerly given its liberty, and which had now become a beautiful chestnut horse, came leaping towards him. "The time has come," it said to the tailor, "when I can repay thee for thy good deed. I know already what is needful to thee, but thou shalt soon have help. Get on me. My back can carry two such as thou." The tailor's courage came back to him. He jumped up in one bound, and the horse went full speed into the town, and right up to the courtyard of the castle. It galloped as quick as lightning thrice round it, and at the third time it fell violently down. At the same instant, however, there was a terrific clap of thunder. A fragment of earth in the middle of the courtyard sprang like a cannonball into the air, and over the castle, and directly after it, a jet of water rose as high as a man on horseback, and the water was as pure as crystal, and the sunbeams began to dance on it. When the king saw that, he arose in amazement, and went and embraced the tailor in the sight of all men. But good fortune did not last long. The king had daughters in plenty, one still prettier than the other, but he had no son. So the malicious shoemaker betook himself for the fourth time to the king, and said, "Lord King, the tailor has not given up his arrogance. He has now boasted that if he liked, he could cause a son to be brought to the Lord King through the air." The king commanded the tailor to be summoned, and said, "If thou causest a son to be brought to me within 9 days, thou shalt have my eldest daughter to wife." "The reward is indeed great," thought the little tailor. "One would willingly do something for it, but the cherries grow too high for me. If I climb for them, the bough will break beneath me, and I shall fall." He went home, seated himself cross-legged on his work table, and thought over what was to be done. "It can't be managed," cried he at last. "I will go away. After all, I can't live in peace here." He tied up his bundle and hurried away to the gate. When he got to the meadow, he perceived his old friend, the stork, who was walking backwards and forwards like a philosopher. Sometimes he stood still, took a frog into close consideration, and at length swallowed it down. The stork came to him and greeted him. "I see," he began, "that thou hast thy pack on thy back. Why art thou leaving the town?" The tailor told him what the king had required of him, and how he could not perform it, and lamented his misfortune. "Don't let thy hair grow gray about that," said the stork. "I will help thee out of thy difficulty. For a long time now, I have carried the children in swaddling clothes into the town, so for once in a way I can fetch a little prince out of the well. Go home and be easy. In 9 days from this time, repair to the royal palace, and there will I come." The little tailor went home, and at the appointed time was at the castle. It was not long before the stork came flying thither and tapped at the window. The tailor opened it, and Cousin Longlegs came carefully in and walked with solemn steps over the smooth marble pavement. He had, moreover, a baby in his beak that was as lovely as an angel, and stretched out its little hands to the queen. The stork laid it in her lap, and she caressed it and kissed it, and was beside herself with delight. Before the stork flew away, he took his traveling bag off his back and handed it over to the queen. In it there were little paper parcels with colored sweetmeats, and they were divided amongst the little princesses. The eldest, however, had none of them, but got the merry tailor for a husband. "It seems to me," said he, "just as if I had won the highest prize. My mother was, if right after all, she always said that whoever trusts in God and only has good luck can never fail." The shoemaker had to make the shoes in which the little tailor danced at the wedding festival, after which he was commanded to quit the town forever. The road to the forest led him to the gallows. Worn out with anger, rage, and the heat of the day, he threw himself down. When he had closed his eyes and was about to sleep, the two crows flew down from the heads of the men who were hanging there and pecked his eyes out. In his madness, he ran into the forest and must have died there of hunger, for no one has ever either seen him again or heard of him. The Death of the Little Hen. Once upon a time, in a quiet village where the fields rolled gently and the nut trees grew thick upon the hills, there lived a little cock and a little hen. They were not grand creatures of the forest, nor mighty beasts of prey, but simple companions who shared their days wandering from hedge to hedge, scratching at the earth, and taking delight in the smallest of things. One bright morning, when the air still held the coolness of dawn, and the grass was silvered with dew, they agreed together to walk to the nut hill. The cock said, "Let us go there, dear hen, and gather the fallen nuts, for the squirrels have left many scattered upon the ground." The hen nodded, and they made a solemn pact as friends often do. Whichever of them found a kernel first should share it with the other, for neither wished to be selfish. Or so it seemed. They went pecking here and there beneath the trees, until at last the little hen, sharp of eye and quick of beak, discovered a nut greater than any she had ever seen before. Its shell was thick, its kernel rich, and it seemed a treasure too fine to divide. A thought of greed crossed her mind, and she whispered within herself, "I will eat this alone, and say nothing to my companion." She cracked the nut with effort, but alas, the kernel was so large that when she tried to swallow it, it stuck fast in her throat. Her chest heaved, her eyes grew wide with fear, and she felt the cruel hand of choking. In her distress, she cried out to her faithful friend, "Cock, I beg thee, run as swiftly as thy legs may carry thee, and fetch me water, else I shall perish." The cock, startled and alarmed, set off at once. He flew down the hill, across the meadow, until he came to a spring bubbling clear among the stones. There he called out, "O stream, lend me thy water, for my companion the little hen lies upon the nut hill with a kernel in her throat, and unless she drinks, she will choke and die." But the spring, like many a thing in fairy tales, would not give freely. It answered, "Bring me first a thread of red silk from the bride who dwells nearby, and then I shall grant thee water." So the cock hurried on, his heart pounding. He came to the bride, who sat in her chamber spinning bright silk for her wedding garments. He cried, "Bride, I pray thee, give me some red silk, for I must carry it to the well. The well must give me water. The water must I take to the nut hill, for my little hen is choking, and her life hangs by a thread." The bride answered, "First fetch me the wreath of flowers that hangs upon the willow, for without it I cannot part with my silk." The cock, though weary, obeyed. He flew to the willow by the river, seized the wreath in his beak, and bore it back to the bride. She gave him then a length of red silk, which he hastened to the spring. The spring, seeing the silk, at last poured forth water into a small vessel. The cock clutched it tightly, for he thought, "Now I shall save her life." But when he reached the nut hill, it was too late. The hen lay still and silent, her feathers ruffled by the wind, her eyes closed forever. The cock set down the water and wept bitterly. His cries rang through the forest, and soon creatures of every kind gathered to mourn. 6 little mice, tender of heart, said, "We shall build her a carriage to bear her to her grave." They fashioned a tiny cart of twigs and leaves, and when it was done, they harnessed themselves before it, while the cock sat solemnly and drove. As they made their way, they met the fox. "Where goest thou, little cock?" asked he. "I go to bury my dear hen," answered the cock. "Then let me come also," said the fox. "Yes," replied the cock, "but sit at the back of the carriage, for my small horses cannot drag thee in the front." So the fox climbed aboard, and after him came the wolf, the bear, the stag, the lion, and at length all the beasts of the wood, until the little carriage was heavy with mourners. Slowly they rolled on, until they came to a stream. "How shall we cross?" said the cock. Then a straw lying nearby said, "I will stretch myself across, and ye shall pass over me." They thanked the straw, but when the 6 mice stepped upon it, the straw slipped away, and all the mice tumbled into the water and were drowned. Once more they were in peril, until a glowing coal hopped forth and said, "I will span the stream. Cross quickly ere my fire go out." But the coal touched the water, hissed, and died, leaving naught but ashes. At last a stone, gray and steadfast, pitied them and laid itself across the stream. Over this bridge the cock carefully drew the carriage. He reached the far bank with the body of his hen, but when he sought to pull over the beasts who sat behind, their weight was too great. The carriage slipped back, and all the forest beasts, with fox, wolf, bear, stag, and lion together, fell into the stream and were drowned. Thus the cock was left all alone with the lifeless hen. With his beak he scraped a grave in the earth, laid her gently within, and heaped a little mound above. There he perched, mourning without ceasing, until grief overcame him, and he too died. And so the tale ends, with silence upon the hill where once the cock and hen had gone in joy. The Good Bargain. There was once a peasant who had driven his cow to the fair and sold her for 7 thalers. On the way home, he had to pass a pond, and already from afar he heard the frogs crying, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike." "Well," said he to himself, "they are talking without rhyme or reason. It is 7 that I have received, not 8. When he got to the water, he cried to them, "Stupid animals that you are, don't you know better than that? It is 7 thalers and not 8. The frogs, however, stood to their "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike." "Come then, if you won't believe it, I can count it out to you." And he took his money out of his pocket and counted out the 7 thalers, always reckoning 24 groschen to a thaler. The frogs, however, paid no attention to his reckoning, but still cried, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike." "Oh, what?" cried the peasant, quite angry. "Since you are determined to know better than I, count it yourselves," and threw all the money into the water to them. He stood still and wanted to wait until they were done and had brought him his own again, but the frogs maintained their opinion and cried continually, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike," and besides that, did not throw the money out again. He still waited a long while until evening came on and he was forced to go home. Then he abused the frogs and cried, "You water splashers, you thickheads, you goggle eyes, you have great mouths and can screech till you hurt one's ears, but you cannot count 7 thalers. Do you think I'm going to stand here till you get done?" And with that he went away, but the frogs still cried, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike," after him till he went home quite angry. After a while he bought another cow, which he killed, and he made the calculation that if he sold the meat well, he might gain as much as the 2 cows were worth, and have the skin into the bargain. When therefore he got to the town with the meat, a great troop of dogs were gathered together in front of the gate, with a large greyhound at the head of them, which jumped at the meat, snuffed at it, and barked, "Wow, wow, wow." As there was no stopping him, the peasant said to him, "Yes, yes, I know quite well that thou art saying, 'Wow, wow, wow,' because thou wantest some of the meat, but I should fare badly if I were to give it to thee." The dog, however, answered nothing but, "Wow, wow." "Wilt thou promise not to devour it all then, and wilt thou go bail for thy companions?" "Wow, wow, wow," said the dog. "Well, if thou insistest on it, I will leave it for thee. I know thee well, and know who is thy master. But this I tell thee, I must have my money in 3 days, or else it will go ill with thee. Thou must just bring it out to me." Thereupon he unloaded the meat and turned back again. The dogs fell upon it and loudly barked, "Wow, wow." The countryman, who heard them from afar, said to himself, "Hark, now they all want some, but the big one is responsible to me for it." When 3 days had passed, the countryman thought, "Tonight my money will be in my pocket," and was quite delighted, but no one would come and pay it. "There is no trusting anyone now," said he, and at last he lost patience and went into the town to the butcher and demanded his money. The butcher thought it was a joke, but the peasant said, "Jesting apart, I will have my money. Did not the great dog bring you the whole of the slaughtered cow 3 days ago?" Then the butcher grew angry, snatched a broomstick, and drove him out. "Wait a while," said the peasant. "There is still some justice in the world," and went to the royal palace and begged for an audience. He was led before the king, who sat there with his daughter, and asked him what injury he had suffered. "Alas," said he, "the frogs and the dogs have taken from me what is mine, and the butcher has paid me for it with the stick." And he related at full length all that had happened. Thereupon the king's daughter began to laugh heartily, and the king said to him, "I cannot give you justice in this, but you shall have my daughter to wife for it. In her whole life she has never yet laughed as she has just done at thee, and I have promised her to him who could make her laugh. Thou mayest thank God for thy good fortune." "Oh," answered the peasant, "I will not have her. I have a wife already, and she is one too many for me. When I go home, it is just as bad as if I had a wife standing in every corner." Then the king grew angry and said, "Thou art a boor." "Ah, Lord King," replied the peasant, "what can you expect from an ox but beef?" "Stop," answered the king. "Thou shalt have another reward. Be off now, But come back in 3 days, and then thou shalt have 500 counted out in full." When the peasant went out by the gate, the sentry said, "Thou hast made the king's daughter laugh, so thou wilt certainly receive something good." "Yes, that is what I think," answered the peasant. 500 are to be counted out to me." "Hark thee," said the soldier, "give me some of it. What canst thou do with all that money?" "As it is thou," said the peasant, "thou shalt have 200. Present thyself in 3 days' time before the king, and let it be paid to thee." A Jew, who was standing by and had heard the conversation, ran after the peasant, held him by the coat, and said, "O wonder, what a luck child thou art! I will change it for thee. I will change it for thee into small coins. What dost thou want with the great thalers?" "Jew," said the countryman, 300 canst thou still have. Give it to me at once in coin. In 3 days from this thou wilt be paid for it by the king." The Jew was delighted with the profit, and brought the sum in bad groschen, 3 of which were worth 2 good ones. After 3 days had passed according to the king's command, the peasant went before the king. "Pull his coat off," said the latter, "and he shall have his 500. "Ah," said the peasant, "they no longer belong to me. I presented 200 of them to the sentinel, and 300 the Jew has changed for me, so by right nothing at all belongs to me." In the meantime, the soldier and the Jew entered and claimed what they had gained from the peasant, and they received the blows strictly counted out. The soldier bore it patiently and knew already how it tasted, but the Jew said sorrowfully, "Alas, alas, are these the heavy thalers?" The king could not help laughing at the peasant, and as all his anger was gone, he said, "As thou hast already lost thy reward before it fell to thy lot, I will give thee something in the place of it. Go into my treasure chamber, and get some money for thyself, as much as thou wilt." The peasant did not need to be told twice, and stuffed into his big pockets whatsoever would go in. Afterwards he went to an inn and counted out his money. The Jew had crept after him, and heard how he muttered to himself, "That rogue of a king has cheated me after all. Why could he not have given me the money himself? And then I should have known what I had. How can I tell now if what I have had the luck to put in my pockets is right or not?" "Good heavens," said the Jew to himself, "that man is speaking disrespectfully of our lord the king. I will run and inform, and then I shall get a reward, and he will be punished as well." When the king heard of the peasant's words, he fell into a passion, and commanded the Jew to go and bring the offender to him. The Jew ran to the peasant. "You are to go at once to the Lord King, in the very clothes you have on." "I know what's right better than that," answered the peasant. "I shall have a new coat made first. Dost thou think that a man with so much money in his pocket is to go there in his ragged old coat?" The Jew, as he saw that the peasant would not stir without another coat, and as he feared that if the king's anger cooled, he himself would lose his reward, and the peasant his punishment, said, "I will out of pure friendship lend thee a coat for the short time. What will people not do for love?" The peasant was contented with this, put the Jew's coat on, and went off with him. The king reproached the countryman because of the evil speaking of which the Jew had informed him. "Ah," said the peasant, "what a Jew says is always false. No true word ever comes out of his mouth. That rascal there is capable of maintaining that I have his coat on." "What is that?" shrieked the Jew. "Is the coat not mine? Have I not lent it to thee out of pure friendship, in order that thou might appear before the Lord King?" When the king heard that, he said, "The Jew has assuredly deceived one or the other of us, either myself or the peasant." And again he ordered something to be counted out to him in hard thalers. The peasant, however, went home in the good coat, with the good money in his pocket, and said to himself, "This time I have hit it." The Pack of Ragamuffins. Once upon a time, when the summer was drawing to its close and the first cool winds began to stir the fields, the cock said to the hen, "Now is the hour when the nuts ripen upon the hill. If we tarry much longer, the greedy squirrel will strip every branch bare and leave us not a single kernel. Come, my dear, let us go together, climb the slope, and eat our fill for once in our lives." The little hen answered with cheer, "Yes, indeed, let us hasten thither. Today we shall feast not in haste, but in merriment, for the world is wide and the autumn sweet." So the two companions set off, scratching and fluttering, until they came to the nut trees on the hill. It was a fair day, bright and mild, and the nuts hung thick on the branches. They pecked and cracked, crunched and gobbled, until their crops were swollen, and their eyes half closed with drowsy pleasure. Whether it was that they had grown too fat from their indulgence, or whether pride had swelled their heads even more than their bellies, who can say? Only this is sure. When evening shadows lengthened, neither wished to return home on foot. Then the cock, who was handy with his beak and claws, split empty shells, fitted them cunningly one within the other, and fashioned a tiny carriage. The hen, ever dainty, hopped inside at once and said with a commanding air, "Now harness thyself, good cock, and draw me home." But the cock bristled and cried, "That I will not. Never shall I stoop to be the beast of burden. I shall sit as coachman upon the box, crack the whip, and guide the way. But drag the cart myself, no, that is no bargain between us." So they quarreled there upon the hill, raising their voices, until a duck, who lived by a nearby pond, came waddling up, quacking harshly. "You thieving vagabonds! Who gave you leave to strip my nut trees bare? You shall pay dearly for this mischief." She rushed at the cock with open beak. Yet the cock, sharp of spur and bold of heart, flew at her and dealt such blows that the duck soon cried for mercy. To end the strife, she let herself be bound to the carriage as a punishment. Then the cock sprang proudly to the box, seized the reins, and cried, "Now, duck, trot as fast as thy webbed feet will carry thee." Off they went, rattling and jolting down the road. Not long had they traveled when they met two strange wanderers, a pin and a needle, hobbling along the dusty path. They called out, "Stop, good sirs, stop. Night falls fast and we are weary. The road grows foul and muddy, and we can go no further. Pray give us room in your carriage, for we have been too long at the tailor's tavern, where the beer was strong." They were so thin and meager that the cock thought, "They will scarcely take any space," and allowed them to climb inside. But first they promised most faithfully not to tread on the hen's delicate toes. Thus the party grew larger, and by nightfall they reached an inn. The cock would gladly have gone further, but the duck staggered from side to side, weary of her labor, so they sought shelter. The innkeeper frowned, for his rooms were full, and he doubted such ragged folk could pay. Yet with smooth words they persuaded him, offering the egg the hen had laid upon the road, and promising also the duck herself, who laid one fresh egg each day. At last he consented, and they all feasted merrily until the small hours. But when dawn broke and the inn lay hushed in slumber, the cock roused the hen. Together they cracked the promised egg and devoured it, leaving only the shell, which they tossed upon the hearth. Then, with sly mischief, they crept to the sleeping needle, stuck its head fast into the landlord's chair cushion, and thrust the pin deep into his towel. That done, without further ado, they flew laughing out of the window across the heath. The duck, who loved the cool air better than a bed, had slumbered in the yard. She heard the flutter of their wings, chuckled to herself, and slipped into a stream that ran nearby, gliding downstream far swifter than ever she had drawn a carriage. The innkeeper slept on till the sun was high. At length he rose, washed, and seized his towel. But alas, the pin scored a bloody stripe across his cheek from ear to ear. Angry and sore, he went to light his pipe. But the moment he stooped to the hearth, the sharp eggshell flew into his eye. "This morning all the world conspires against me," he cried. Seeking relief, he sank into his grandfather's armchair, but leapt up again with a howl, for the hidden needle had pierced him in a place more tender than his face. Now his wrath boiled over. He called to mind the odd guests who had come late the night before, and when he searched, lo, they were vanished. Then he swore a solemn oath. Never again would he take in such ragamuffins, for they eat much, pay little, and repay kindness with knavery. And thus ends the tale of the cock and the hen, the duck, the pin, and the needle, each sly in their way, but leaving trouble behind them. The Raven. There was once upon a time a queen who had a little daughter who was still so young that she had to be carried. One day the child was naughty, and the mother might say what she liked, but the child would not be quiet. Then she became impatient, and as the ravens were flying about the palace, she opened the window and said, "I wish you were a raven and would fly away, and then I should have some rest." Scarcely had she spoken the words before the child was changed into a raven and flew from her arms out of the window. It flew into a dark forest and stayed in it a long time, and the parents heard nothing of their child. Then, one day a man was on his way through this forest and heard the raven crying and followed the voice. And when he came nearer, the bird said, "I am a king's daughter by birth and am bewitched, but thou canst set me free." "What am I to do?" asked he. She said, "Go further into the forest, and thou wilt find a house wherein sits an aged woman who will offer thee meat and drink, but you must accept nothing. For if you eatest and drinkest anything, thou wilt fall into a sleep, and then thou wilt not be able to deliver me. In the garden behind the house there is a great heap of tan, and on this thou shalt stand and wait for me. For 3 days I will come every afternoon at 2 o'clock in a carriage. On the first day 4 white horses will be harnessed to it, then 4 chestnut horses, and lastly 4 black ones. But if thou art not awake, but sleeping, I shall not be set free." The man promised to do everything that she desired, but the raven said, "Alas, I know already that thou wilt not deliver me. Thou wilt accept something from the woman." Then the man once more promised that he would certainly not touch anything either to eat or to drink. But when he entered the house, the old woman came to him and said, "Poor man, how faint you are. Come and refresh yourself. Eat and drink." "No," said the man, "I will not eat or drink." She, however, let him have no peace, and said, "If you will not eat, take 1 drink out of the glass. 1 is nothing." Then he let himself be persuaded, and drank. Shortly before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he went into the garden to the tan heap to wait for the raven. As he was standing there, his weariness all at once became so great that he could not struggle against it, and lay down for a short time. But he was determined not to go to sleep. Hardly, however, had he lain down, than his eyes closed of their own accord, and he fell asleep and slept so soundly that nothing in the world could have aroused him. At 2 o'clock, the raven came driving up with 4 white horses, but she was already in deep grief and said, "I know he is asleep." And when she came into the garden, he was indeed lying there asleep on the heap of tan. She alighted from the carriage, went to him, shook him, and called him, but he did not awake. Next day, about noon, the old woman came again and brought him food and drink, but he would not take any of it. But she let him have no rest, and persuaded him until at length he again took 1 drink out of the glass. Towards 2 o'clock, he went into the garden to the tan heap to wait for the raven, but all at once felt such a great weariness that his limbs would no longer support him. He could not help himself, and was forced to lie down, and fell into a heavy sleep. When the raven drove up with 4 brown horses, she was already full of grief, and said, "I know he is asleep." She went to him, but there he lay sleeping, and there was no wakening him. Next day the old woman asked, what was the meaning of this? He was neither eating nor drinking anything. Did he want to die? He replied, "I am not allowed to eat or drink, and will not do so." But she set a dish with food and a glass with wine before him, and when he smelt it he could not resist, and swallowed a deep draught. When the time came, he went out into the garden to the heap of tan, and waited for the king's daughter. But he became still more weary than on the day before, and lay down and slept as soundly as if he had been a stone. At 2 o'clock the raven came with 4 black horses, and the coachman and everything else was black. She was already in the deepest grief, and said, "I know that he is asleep and cannot deliver me." When she came to him, there he was lying fast asleep. She shook him and called him, but she could not waken him. Then she laid a loaf beside him, and after that a piece of meat, and thirdly a bottle of wine, and he might consume as much of all of them as he liked, but they would never grow less. After this she took a gold ring from her finger, and put it on his, and her name was graven on it. Lastly, she laid a letter beside him, wherein was written what she had given him, and that none of the things would ever grow less. And in it was also written, "I see right well that here you will never be able to deliver me, but if thou art still willing to deliver me, come to the golden castle of Stromberg. It lies in thy power, of that I am certain." And when she had given him all these things, she seated herself in her carriage and drove to the golden castle of Stromberg. When the man awoke and saw that he had slept, he was sad at heart, and said, "She has certainly driven by, and I have not set her free." Then he perceived the things which were lying beside him, and read the letter wherein was written how everything had happened. So he arose and went away, intending to go to the golden castle of Stromberg, but he did not know where it was. After he had walked about the world for a long time, he entered into a dark forest, and walked for 14 days, and still could not find his way out. Then it was once more evening, and he was so tired that he lay down in a thicket and fell asleep. Next day he went onwards, and in the evening, as he was again about to lie down beneath some bushes, he heard such a howling and crying that he could not go to sleep. And at the time when people light the candles, he saw one glimmering, and arose and went towards it. Then he came to a house which seemed very small, for in front of it a great giant was standing. He thought to himself, "If I go in and the giant sees me, it will very likely cost me my life." At length he ventured it and went in. When the giant saw him, he said, "It is well that thou comest, for it is long since I have eaten. I will at once eat thee for my supper." "I'd rather you would leave that alone," said the man. "I do not like to be eaten, but if thou hast any desire to eat, I have quite enough here to satisfy thee." "If that be true," said the giant, "thou mayest be easy. I was only going to devour thee because I had nothing else." Then they went and sat down to the table, and the man took out the bread, wine, and meat which would never come to an end. "This pleases me well," said the giant, and ate to his heart's content. Then the man said to him, "Canst thou tell me where the golden castle of Stromberg is?" The giant said, "I will look at my map. All the towns and villages and houses are to be found on it." He brought out the map which he had in the room and looked for the castle, but it was not to be found on it. "It's no matter," said he. "I have some still larger maps in my cupboard upstairs, and we will look in them." But there, too, it was in vain. The man now wanted to go onwards, but the giant begged him to wait a few days longer until his brother, who had gone out to bring some provisions, came home. When the brother came home, they inquired about the golden castle of Stromberg. He replied, "When I have eaten and have had enough, I will look in the map." Then he went with them up to his chamber, and they searched in his map, but could not find it. Then he brought out still older maps, and they never rested until they found the golden castle of Stromberg, but it was many thousand miles away. "How am I to get there?" asked the man. The giant said, "I have 2 hours' time, during which I will carry you into the neighborhood, but after that I must be at home to suckle the child that we have." So the giant carried the man to about 100 leagues from the castle, and said, "Thou canst very well walk the rest of the way alone." And he turned back, but the man went onwards day and night, until at length he came to the golden castle of Stromberg. It stood on a glass mountain, and the bewitched maiden drove in her carriage round the castle, and then went inside it. He rejoiced when he saw her, and wanted to climb up to her. But when he began to do so, he always slipped down the glass again. And when he saw that he could not reach her, he was filled with trouble, and said to himself, "I will stay down here below and wait for her." So he built himself a hut, and stayed in it for a whole year, and every day saw the king's daughter driving about above, but never could go to her. Then one day he saw from his hut 3 robbers who were beating each other, and cried to them, "God be with ye." They stopped when they heard the cry, but as they saw no one, they once more began to beat each other, and that too most dangerously. So he again cried, "God be with ye." Again they stopped, looked round about, but as they saw no one, they went on beating each other. Then he cried for the 3rd time, "God be with ye," and thought, "I must see what these 3 are about," and went thither, and asked why they were beating each other so furiously. One of them said that he found a stick, and that when he struck a door with it, that door would spring open. The next said that he had found a mantle, and that whenever he put it on, he was invisible. But the third said he had found a horse, on which a man could ride everywhere, even up the glass mountain. And now they did not know whether they ought to have these things in common, or whether they ought to divide them. Then the man said, "I will give you something in exchange for these 3 things. Money indeed have I not, but I have other things of more value. But first I must try yours to see if you have told the truth." Then they put him on the horse, threw the mantle round him, and gave him the stick in his hand. And when he had all these things, they were no longer able to see him. So he gave them some vigorous blows, and cried, "Now, vagabonds, you have got what you deserve. Are you satisfied?" And he rode up the glass mountain. But when he came in front of the castle at the top, it was shut. Then he struck the door with his stick, and it sprang open immediately. He went in and ascended the stairs until he came to the hall where the maiden was sitting, with a golden cup full of wine before her. She, however, could not see him, because he had the mantle on. And when he came up to her, he drew from his finger the ring which she had given him, and threw it into the cup so that it rang. Then she cried, "That is my ring, so the man who is to set me free must be here." They searched the whole castle and did not find him, but he had gone out and had seated himself on the horse and thrown off the mantle. When they came to the door, they saw him and cried aloud in their delight. Then he alighted and took the king's daughter in his arms, but she kissed him and said, "Now hast thou set me free, and tomorrow we will celebrate our wedding." Dr. Know-all. There was once, long ago, a poor peasant by the name of Crab. Day after day he toiled in the fields and the forest, and all that he owned in the world were 2 sturdy oxen, his wooden cart, and a patched-up coat to cover his back. One morning, when the sun was low and the mist still hung in the valleys, he yoked his oxen and loaded his cart with a heavy pile of firewood. With slow steps he drove into town, hoping to earn a few coins for his labor. At length, he stopped before the house of a wealthy doctor, who bought the whole load for 2 shining thalers. The doctor happened to be seated at table, eating his midday meal. There were fine dishes before him, meat seasoned with herbs, golden wine in crystal glasses, and servants waiting on his every word. Crab, with his cracked hands still sticky with resin, gazed upon the scene with wonder. His heart began to burn with envy, and he thought to himself, "How good it must be to live as such a man. Not to chop wood, not to drive weary oxen, but to sit in comfort, eat like a lord, and be called a man of knowledge. Oh, if only I too could be a doctor." The desire grew stronger the longer he looked, until he could no longer contain it. He cleared his throat and said rather shyly, "Sir Doctor, might a poor fellow like me ever become a doctor also?" The doctor, amused by the simplicity of the question, smiled and answered, "Why, yes indeed, that is not so hard as you think." Crab's eyes lit up. "And what must I do?" he asked eagerly. The doctor, wishing to make sport of him, said, "First, you must buy yourself an ABC book, one that has a cock painted on the first page. Second, you must sell your cart and your oxen, and with the money get fine clothes and such things as belong to the trade of medicine. Third, you must have a sign painted on which stand the words, 'I am Dr. Know-all.' Nail that over your house door, and people will believe you are wise." Crab, simple though he was, believed every word. He went at once and did exactly as he had been told. He sold his oxen and cart, bought himself a bright coat, a feathered hat, and the book with the cock upon it. He hung above his door the sign that read in bold letters, "I am Dr. Know-all." Thus he became a doctor, at least in name. It was not long before people began to come to him, asking for help, and though Crab had no knowledge at all, fortune seemed to smile upon his foolish answers. After a little while, news reached a certain great lord. This lord had been robbed of a large sum of money, and he was eager to find the thief. His servants told him of a doctor in a nearby village, one called Dr. Noel, who surely by his very name must know the secret. Without delay, the lord ordered his carriage with 6 horses harnessed to it and drove out to Crab's cottage. He asked at once, "Are you Dr. Noel?" "Yes, that I am," answered Crab, puffing out his chest. "Then you must come with me and discover who has stolen my treasure." Crab scratched his head and said, "Oh yes, my lord, but my wife Greta must come as well." The lord consented, and so Crab and his wife climbed into the splendid carriage, marveling at the velvet cushions, and away they rode to the castle. There, the tables were already laid with silver plates and golden cups, for the lord wished to treat his guest with honor. "Sit down and eat, doctor," said he. "Yes, but Greta too," replied Crab, and he seated himself at her side. They were served the choicest dishes. Now it so happened that the servants who had stolen the money were the very ones carrying the food. The first servant entered with a dish, and Crab, meaning only to whisper to his wife, nudged her and said, "Greta, that is the first." By this he meant the first course, but the servant, pale with guilt, thought he meant, "That is the first thief." Terrified, he hurried outside and told the others, "The doctor knows everything. He said I was the first." The second servant, trembling, brought in his dish. Again, Crab nudged his wife and said, "Greta, that is the second." The servant turned as white as milk, fled the room, and gasped to his comrades, "We are lost. He knows I am the second." The third fared no better, for Crab repeated the same words, and again the servant believed himself discovered. At last, the fourth servant entered with a covered dish. The lord turned to Crab and said, "Now, doctor, show me your wisdom. Tell me what lies beneath this cover." Crab stared at the dish. He had no idea, for he was no more a doctor than an ox. In his helplessness, he sighed and muttered under his breath, "Ah, poor Crab." The lord leapt up, clapping his hands. "There, did I not say so? He has named the thief himself, Crab. That is the very fellow who stole the money." The guilty servants grew pale as ashes. They feared they were undone, and quickly signaled to Crab that he should follow them outside. Trembling, he obeyed. Once beyond the hall, they fell on their knees before him and confessed all. "Good doctor, we have indeed taken the treasure. Only spare us, and we will bring it back, and moreover, give you a heavy purse besides." Crab nodded solemnly, as if this were the very thing he had foreseen. They led him to the hiding place, gave him the gold, and begged for silence. Crab agreed readily, for he was more than content with his reward. Returning to the hall, he sat down once more and said gravely, "My lord, I shall now consult my book to see where the money is concealed." He opened his ABC book, turned the pages this way and that, searching for the cock upon the frontispiece. Meanwhile, the fifth servant, burning with curiosity, crept into the stove to overhear what might be revealed. Crab, unable to find the picture at once, shook his head and said aloud, "I know you are here, so you may as well come out." The servant in the stove thought himself discovered, leapt out in terror and cried, "Indeed, this man knows everything." So Dr. Noel returned the treasure to the lord, who marveled at his wisdom. Yet he did not betray the guilty, but kept their secret. From the Lord he received rich thanks, and from the servants an even greater reward. Thus he became both wealthy and renowned, and all the people of the land believed that truly there was none wiser than Dr. Noel.